Hello, I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Today we're talking about organ meats as superfood for mental health. What we're talking about today is organ meats, especially freeze-dried and prepared capsules of organ meats for mental health and things like depression and anxiety. The reason for that is that these foods contain tremendous amounts of what you require in your brain to be healthy, and that is B vitamins, the B complex vitamins, in the right proportions and the right forms. It includes the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, especially K2 for brain and bone health and immune health. K1 is for clotting. It includes trace minerals, a spectrum of trace minerals which occur in very small amounts throughout the Earth's crust and in the environment. And most important probably is the omega-3s, which a lot of you get from fish oil, and that's cool, but you have to get a fish oil that's filtered because fish oil would contain mercury and other heavy metals. Organ meats are perhaps the original superfood for humans. There are many plant-based superfoods, and these can be very useful for a number of people. I don't want to bash plants all the time, but I do want to say that there's a place for organ meats and nose-to-tail eating, and there's also a place for restricted plant intake. There are people who have problems with anti-nutrients from plants, from lectins, from other types of isothiocyanates. There's a bunch of stuff in plants that can set off people of different conditions. So I want to talk about organ meats and why they can be useful and why they're necessary. Often when people start a new diet that includes more meat and less plants, or they're analyzing an old diet that they've always had, which included meats, they notice that their food that they were eating, their choices, were mostly skeletal muscle and not organ meats. That is an imbalanced intake of protein, an imbalanced intake of fat and minerals and vitamins. It turns out that there's a different distribution of amino acids or proteins, of fats, omega-3 and 6, and trace minerals, as well as other things like saturated fats, in the difference between skeletal muscle, which is steak and ground beef, versus organ meats like pancreas, heart, liver, kidney. These are organs mostly the ruminant animals are the ones that we eat, the cows essentially, but you'll see that also in other organs. There are cultures that eat this regularly, and of course most humans evolved eating organ meats, and many omnivores and carnivores and hunter-gatherers, we all had to eat organ meats at some point in history. So we don't just eat the steaks and eat the ground meat. So it's important to remember that we need grass-fed, not grain-fed, not grain-finished, because we need the grass instead of the grains, because the grains are so high in omega-6, which can be toxic if the omega-6 is too high. Now, omega-6 is a nutrient. We need omega-6, but it's quite possible for humans to get too much omega-6 at the expense of omega-3. And omega-3 fats are a different fat that you see most commonly in fish oil because it comes essentially from algae in the ocean. But it also can grow in grasses that have very, very good rhizomes or root organisms in their root system. So if a plant has a good root system and an animal eats those plants, the animal's organ meats will have the omega-3 fats in them. But you won't see it so much in the skeletal muscle. You won't see it in the steak. You won't see it in the cuts, the chops. You won't see it in the ground meats, the ground beef, which is essentially ground chuck or other ground skeletal muscle meat. So we want to have organic. We want to have the avoidance of chemicals. Organic doesn't mean that there's enough minerals in the soil of the plants that feed the animals, but organic does mean that there's a certification that we don't have chemicals and solvents and other types of things in that soil. Unfortunately, there's fertilizers that have heavy metals, so we might have to test that soil for heavy metals too. So we're looking for high trace minerals, high proteins, high B vitamins, high fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. We're looking for a balanced source of fats, especially omega-3. We're looking for trace minerals, and all of those things, including saturated fats that are healthy for you, occur in the organ meats of these ruminant animals, which is why we always talk about that. All of the things I just named are vitally important for depression and anxiety and really all of the mental illnesses that people struggle with. So you can run around trying to take plant-based single vitamins like a B12 here and a B6 there and a 5-methylfolate there and a trace mineral over here, and it works. And I've done it for patients for years. In fact, that's quite often how we treat vegan patients and vegetarian patients, and it works. But if you don't have that constraint, man, it makes a lot more sense to get some kind of organic, grass-fed, freeze-dried, ground-up organ meat capsules that you can swallow and not have to eat the meat. Americans tend to not like the taste of prepared Organ meats, it is much better in Europe. I've eaten organ meats in Europe and they're quite tasty. It depends on how and who prepares them. Hopefully we'll be getting into cookbooks and recipes and sous vide and all kinds of stuff that we can do for different ways of looking at organ meats for optimal mental health.